Hello, game makers. Today we are going to start our breakout game. In the past, I've used the drag and drop features, but today I am going to use Game Maker language. So I did create a new project. I'm going to do it in Game Maker language. I'm going to go ahead and call this Classroom Breakout, and away we go. So you can see that I end up with really nothing here. It's pretty empty. Um, so we are starting this game from scratch. My goal is to create 3 sprites and one object and set up our room today as well as our paddle. So create sprite. This is going to be our paddle object. I'm going to remember to name it. I'm going to call it a bat just because in the past and when I've set this project up, that's what it's been called. Set the height to 128. Sorry, the width to 128, height to 32, and this is going to be the size of our sprite. So I'm going to edit, zoom out slightly. I would like it to have a white rectangular background. Uh, Bring my brush up in size, so that looks pretty good. I'm going to fill it in with green. Obviously, if you're doing this project at home, you can color it any color you want. I'm going to also give it a highlight and some shading here. And I'm going to do that using, I'm going to drop my alpha down, which is how transparent the color is. And for my highlight, I'm going to increase the value and put a few dots of that color here as if light was shining on a 3D object. And I'm also going to go ahead and give some shading down here. So now I'm going to decrease the value, which is going to make it darker, and add some shading down here. Now, I didn't spend a ton of time on this. Um, I may go back off camera and fix up my sprite. But there's my sprite there. I also want to create a very simple sprite for my boundary. So this is just the wall. It's actually going to be invisible, so it doesn't have to look that good. I'll leave 6464 as my default. Going to color it pink, but again, drop the transparent or increase the transparency and fill it in. And that's just going to be my wall. We did something very similar with the fruit game. And then the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a sprite that's actually going to serve as a tile set. So I'm going to call it SPR tile set. And I'm going to leave the 6464 size, but then I would like it to be broken up in 16 pixel bits. And so what I'm going to do is one thing I will notice is that this when we do a tile set, and this is pretty consistent among game engines, this top left is not going to be selectable, but that's okay. I'm just going to set up my very first tile in there. Um, Actually, I'm freehanding this, and I should really just use the line tool, and that way I can click, and it draws a perfectly straight line. I should work on making this easy for myself. And then to go ahead, I'm going to fill that in with pink. And then I'm going to give it just a little bit of shine right up there with some white. Um, yeah, I think that looks pretty good. And so I'm going to select the entire thing. So I chose the rectangle select. I think I missed it slightly. Let's see if that's going to be a problem. Control C, and you can see now I can copy and fill in the rest of my um, cells. And so it looks like I've done a lot of work, but I really haven't. I'm probably not going to use these cells. Oops, I made a mistake there. Let's see if I can get that fixed easy enough. Probably not going to use some of this. Oh man, I'm having a tough time here, group. All right, come on, you can do this. Like there. Okay, perfect. Um, and I should quit while I'm ahead, but I'm almost done here, so I'm going to go ahead and just fill these in. So now I have a tile set. It's well, I have the sprite for the tile set, but it's not quite a tile set yet. So in order to be able to use this as tiles, and if you don't remember from the fruit game, tiles are a graphic element that doesn't get programmed. It's really there for decoration, and allows you to decorate a room or fill a room with graphical elements very quickly. So I'm going to say create a tile set. I'm going to load this sprite. I'm going to leave the default 1616 here because that's going to be really perfect for what I'm doing. I guess I should give it, I'll call it tile set pink just to exhibit good behavior. And I don't really need to change any of those other settings. So now let's create our first object. So our first object is going to be, of course, the bat, and I'm going to give it a sprite. And I want it to be able to move left and right only. And I, just like the plane from the scrolling shooter, I want to keep it in my room. But there's a little bit of a complication in that later on I plan to put a power up that will increase the size of the bat. So I can't use a hard number here to determine when this object has reached the edge of the room. So I'm going to have to get a little creative, and I'll show you how I'm going to do that in a second. But I got to remember, when I have a moving object, it's always a really smart move to center it. So you can see this little cross right here, plus sign, is now the center of my object. And it's also going to be, it's also referred to as offset in coding. So the X offset is actually what I'm going to be using, and the X offset is its position on the X axis. Remember, the X goes left to right. And so I need to use this center position, known as the X offset, to keep it in the room, and I'll show you how to do that. So the first thing I'm going to do is give it a move speed, and I'm not going to use the built-in variable. Instead, I'm going to use a user-created instance variable. So SPD equals 4. And then in my step event, remember the step is every frame, I'm going to check to see if the player is pressing either the left or right key. To do that, in code, you say if keyboard, keyboard check, and then in parentheses the key that you want to check for. And so I'm, in this case, I'm going to look for if the left arrow key is being pushed. And if it is, I want to do the things inside this bracket. So these brackets are like the begin of block, end of block, if you remember that from GameMaker 1.4. So I only want to be able to move left as long as the distance between the center of my sprite is a greater distance than half of the sprite plus its current speed. So I'm going to say if x, its x position, is greater than sprite, get x offset. So that, again, the x offset is the x position of the origin where I centered it. And I do need to say which sprite I'm referring to. So in parentheses, I need to say it's sprite index. So whatever the sprite is that's been associated with this object plus speed. So if its x is greater than half of the sprite plus speed, then it's going to minus it from its x position. So x minus equals is the same thing as saying move in the negative direction towards the left of the screen relative speed. So if the keyboard is if it's being pressed, the left mouse button, if there's enough room, then move to the left. And I'm just going to go ahead and copy. So I'm going to go do a Control C and then Control V. And now I want to see if check if the player is pushing the right key. By the way, if I only wanted it to register when the player first pressed the key, I could say keyboard check pressed underscore pressed. Or if I wanted to know if the player had released a key, I can do if keyboard underscore check underscore released and then put the key that I'm referring to. So now, a little bit different here. Now we're going to be on the right side of the room. So I need to see if the X is less than room width minus room width minus the half of the sprite minus speed. Then if those things are all true, then we're going to add to its x position in the room. So remember when we're at the we're on the right of the room, we need to take the room width and then subtract half of its sprite Um, so I'm not 1,000% sure I've set this up correctly. So the only way to be sure is to put this object in the room. So it's an object, so it does go on the instance layer. And you can see that the room by default is 1024 by 768, and I'm actually going to use that default here. Um, that sprite actually doesn't look too bad considering I only spent a few moments on it. And I'm going to run the game and see what happens. I'm going to hit the left key and it's going to move to the left and stop as it reaches the right of the room. And let's see if it will also stop when I go, or, oh, I did it right. Somehow I managed. I won't lie though, this is not the first time I've tried to shoot this video today. So I have a working bat that moves left and right at a consistent speed, and I'm still holding down left, but it will not move past. Um, there is something I could probably do to make that a little more perfect, um, and that is to say if there's not enough room and the player is still pushing left, then x will equal sprite get x offset. So it'll put the sprite exactly on the left edge of the room, and in this case, if I want it to be exactly on the right edge of the room, x equals room width minus sprite get x offset. And then that'll mean that there's no space. It will be pixel perfect from going off the screen. So that, I think, is all I need for my bat to move around the room. And now I need to set up my room real fast. So in my room, I'm going to put 3 instances of a boundary. And I think this grid is set up for 32, 32. Let's check. And so that'll be a little bit of a problem if I try to set um, my boundary in. So I'm actually going to set that to 16 by 16, and it's just going to make things a little bit easier for me. I'm going to grab all right, close that out. I'm going to grab my first, um, oh, I didn't create it as an object. So you can't drag sprites into the room. You have to create it as an object. This will be the world's simplest object, and all it needs is a sprite. And I don't even need to mark it solid for what I'm doing, um, for how I'm going about this game. So now I have an object that I can drag in. I guess 32, 32 would have been fine there. Now I'm going to leave it at 16, 16 because that's the size of my tile. So I'm going to select my object and I'm going to drag it down. You can see it's pretty large, but I'm going to do that just to be careful in case my ball starts to really hum around the room. I want to make sure my wall is large enough that the ball won't clear it completely as it jumps from position to position. Control C, Control V, drag this over just like that, beautiful. And then I need one more wall object that's going to go right here. Drag that across. All right, that looks pretty good. So now I'm ready to start using my tile set. But a tile set's not an instance, and a tile set in GameMaker 2 isn't a background. It's actually its own thing. So I'm going to create a tile layer. I'm going to select my tile set, and you'll notice that that top left, as promised, isn't selectable. And I'm not sure why that is, but that's pretty consistent among all game engines. I'm going to select the ones I want by clicking and holding, and you can see now I can lay down 3 tiles at once. I'm going to click and hold, and I'm just going to drag down the screen. And it paints those tiles perfectly. I'm going to do the same over here. Pretty slick. And this is a great way if you have different surfaces, like if you wanted to make a platformer game like Mario Brothers, and you wanted, for example, some of your platforms to look like grass, some of them look like dirt. Really easy way to fill up that space. And so you can see here I was able to go across and select 4 at a time. I could select a whole bunch if I wanted to, but that doesn't make sense for my game. So I'm almost done with this video. We created, we use a tile set. One of the interesting things about the tile set is it automatically sets the grid to whatever your tiles are set for. So in this case, my tiles were set for 16 by 16. So that automatically changed my grid, which was pretty convenient. So let's take a look at how all this stuff looks together. It looks like I have a bad if statement in my step event. So let's take a look at that. That was unplanned. So it says line 6, else x equals sprite get offset. Oh, I didn't say, I didn't indicate the index of the sprite. So again, you need to say which sprite to get that origin from. And in this case, sprite index automatically equals whatever sprite you've listed up here. So that should fix that, hopefully. Otherwise, I got some figuring to do. So now I should be able to, you can't see it because it goes behind my tiles, but that bat will stop exactly at the edge of the room. So everything looks pretty good. I have a boundary that the ball will bounce off of. I got a tile that looks really nice around the room. And so in about 15 minutes of work, we got a lot done. So I will see you all in the next video.